That's good. Awesome.
Welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. I'm here with Karen. Hi, Karen. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great, Signe. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. So excited to have you. So, Karen is an emerging fund manager. Would love to learn about your fund, what you guys invest in, and just learn a little bit about yourself.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I am originally from Peru. I moved from Peru to the US in 2005 for college. My background is in finance for corporate executive career in Fortune 100 companies. Started my career back in American Airlines, spent some time at PepsiCo and last at Visa, and then decided to create my own company and my venture capital firm, which I'm a founder and managing partner at, Pachamama Ventures. Pachamama means Mother Earth in Quechua, the ancient language of the Incas. Being originally from Peru and a woman, I wanted to name my firm something that resonated with my identity, which is really important to me, but also to share the mission with people, which is what we invest in, which is climate tech to heal the earth. So that's the
That is
genesis.
amazing. And so, connecting with how you drew your interest to climate tech in order to heal the earth. Tell us a little bit more about that and kind of how you shifted your focus from, financial and executives to this. And was there kind of like a moment of epiphany or, that story behind that? Would love to hear it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really goes back to my childhood in Peru, right? It's something that I've always been passionate about nature and healing the earth. I mean, honestly, growing up in Peru, which is, as you know, the biodiversity basin, right, of the world. Like, I mean, we have so many different ecosystems and natural systems that Peru is a tapestry, rich tapestry of, right? We have the coast, which is where I grew up. I grew up right by the Pacific Ocean in Lima, Peru, the capital, right by the ocean. And then you have also the mountains, which is where Cusco, Machu Picchu, people that are more familiar because they go over there a lot to visit for good reason, right? History, rich history and everything, but also great the whole mountain range there. And then also the Amazon, the jungle, right? So like we have these three different reach in on their own accord, like ecosystems of nature, flora, fauna, all of that. To top it all off, and being just so close to it and seeing the impact of climate change in my backyard, so to speak, and seeing how it affects not just the climate and nature, but also the interconnection with public health. I mean, I grew up with asthma and I was rushed to the ER twice. One almost semi-fatally, right? Like, I mean, it was something that I could see, because of the smog in Lima, right? Like the pollution and everything that would interact with the climate and also health, right? It realizing that that's a problem that really touches people's lives on a very tangible way. And to top it all off, my father was an agronomist, right? So he was a representative for a German agtech company at the time, and I remember going with him on a couple of his road trips for work, visiting mountain farmers in Peru, right? And so the conversations, I mean, you would think that a 10, 12-year-old is not paying attention, but I really was. I was present in the room when he was talking to the farmers and seeing this dialogue back and forth of my father trying to teach them and like bring this technology around, or like new products, fertilizers or whatever, to care for the soil, right? But it was really cool to see also this, like, the feedback loop back from the farmers to my father, who was more like on the technology side and like selling these products to them from the ancient wisdom that they had, right? That there was like this concept of their low tech solutions that have been adopted for centuries, millennia even, right? Like cover crop, low tech techniques to really care for the health of the soil and whatnot. So it was really interesting, and all of that really kind of influenced me. So even when I came to the US and ended up studying finance and economics, and that took me in a different route with corporate America, is always something that I kept going back to, right? Like, so I was always involved as a donor, grassroots volunteer, like with all of these conservation agencies. And then the conversation started not moving away, but like also, instead of just conservation, now how do we do mitigation, right, against the impacts of climate change, and finally adaptation, which is this new era where we're like starting to like find these solutions to all of that, to pretty much make it habitable Earth, right? The world is really catching on fire. So how can we make it livable, right? Because there's so many people that are literally not just losing livelihoods, but lives, actual lives being lost to the impacts of climate change. So that's where my reason for doing this is stems from.
That's amazing. And just to also touch on, like, because it's going to be different what the climate change effects are from your home country in Peru to where you live now in North America. Did you find that there were influences that then influenced the startup ecosystems and innovation between your home, your old and new home, and how that kind of affected you and what you kind of saw in your views?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, well, yeah, I moved to the US in 2005. So like next year it'll be 20 years, which is mind-blowing to think about that I've been in the US now.
Yeah,
It's been such a long time. But I think one of the things that is true, just worldwide, right? Like, you're seeing that like on the news all the time now, right? Like the fact that the wildfires in California, right, are happening all the time now, much more often than like even 20 years ago. The fact that you're seeing a lot of floods all over, like the country in the U.S., right? Like in the sea, the coastal sea levels are rising and all. I mean, like wherever you see, it's kind of hard now to look away and not or pretend it's not there. I mean, I think 15 years ago, people that 15 years ago would have argued that this is not a thing. I mean, it's yeah, maybe it's happening, but it's future stuff. Like that's not the
right.
apocalypse. It's
Someone
too
else's
early to talk.
problem.
Like yeah, yeah. And now it's really impacting it all, right? Like it's like even in and maybe we're not seeing it yet, but it's definitely coming. I can tell you like the cost of insurance, or even if your home is insurable or not, like it's starting to really become an issue. And I've seen it in publicly traded companies as large as I've worked at, right? Like
Right,
issues where like your balance sheet actually has, as a big company, will have like natural and physical risks that you have to assess, that you have to now think about how to incorporate and price in these risks, right? Now I'm just talking like a finance person, but it truly is, like it really is. It goes back to how, no matter where you're from, and I do come from the global south, and I do know that the global south and it like has this like disparate impact of climate change, right? Like if you
yeah,
see the floods in Pakistan, right? That they barely made the news, by the way, right? Like there are all things that are happening out there that are not really getting enough coverage, right? For one reason or another. But it is the global south that is actually very in and equally impacted by climate change, right? So I have a big passion to, perhaps from a fund 2 or 3 as the firm grows, to really start investing in LATAM, going back to where my roots are from, also Southeast Asia, Africa eventually, right? Those are the places where like a lot of these uh, climate change is really having those devastating effects. But even in the US, right? I mean, even from in communities that we're not talking enough about, like in mid America farmers, right? I mean, they are barely making ends meet, right? So I think it's really easy to ignore or forget because you just kind of don't. It's out of sight, out of mind. But
right.
then there are a lot of problems that are happening as well as in like large cities and metropolitan or urban areas where like you really lack the ability to control the pollution. Like I said, I mean, I experienced that in Lima. You can experience that in New York or any large city in China, right? Like the effects of pollution and the smog and how that impacts your public health, your health issues, and as a public health concern, right? In other words, but yeah, everything is interconnected. So the beauty of solving for climate change, in my mind, ultimately is you're solving for many things. It's
Mhm.
not just climate change, but also health, also for social injustice and equity, right? Also for urban transportation, right? Like how you lay out, right? The city and the plants, like all of it is kind of interconnected, and that's where my kind of a theory of change is moving towards solving for climate change.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There are so many different things that you can be solving for. And I think that, especially when you're explaining it either to new entrepreneurs or, first time LPs or LPs that are not generally in this space, you kind of have to start all over again and kind of explain that breadth of different kinds of investments that you can have. I was actually at a very interesting event. It was part of the mosaic for students to find internships,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
specifically for sustainability, right? And so I was asking some of the students, I just wanted their opinion, and this is the same question that I, would love to ask you, is about, I've seen, for example, one of the innovations in climate that was funded recently in Canada was about, it was a giant battery. So it was kind of like, okay, well, after the fracking, we will conserve the energy in a giant battery. Is that considered an innovation in
Well,
climate tech, And so
well,
I was asking the students this, and their answers were so interesting and creative. And so they were like debating about it. And yeah, so would just love to understand, the prevention versus the cure, you know what I mean?
mm,
And what your thoughts are when it comes to climate tech.
yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting question because I think that a lot of how do I say this? There is a lot of pushback, and for good reason, against what it's being now called or being known as greenwashing, right?
Yes,
And
I
I,
love that
as
you
an
bring that up.
investor, I'm deeply yeah, you know, it is a real concern, right? Like I think we have to really be careful. And the way I like to do diligence on the companies, for example, that I intend to invest in, right? Like one of the things that I have in a scorecard is like, the avoiding unintended ecological harm, right? And what does that mean? It's just a lot of words to just say, you might be introducing a solution to, which is, it's not even quite greenwashing. I'm going to go back to that in a second. But like one of the things is that you could be solving for one problem in climate change and then inadvertently creating another one, a new one.
Mhm.
So like there's just like when you invest in climate tech, there is like a so-called like an imperative to be even over diligent in your process when it comes to that because you want to be careful, right? Like is it a net positive to climate and nature? Great, right? Like I mean, I think that I would even say that I come across many companies that show up in my inbox or come, submit for investment consideration that call themselves a climate tech company. And that's a funny thing, right? It's not only obviously in AI that happens a lot. Companies that are not
Happens a
necessarily
lot.
AI, but they
Yeah.
call themselves an AI.
Yeah.
Let's just put the sticker on the side and then it's done. Like, right. And I think in climate is similar. There's a lot of momentum around climate tech right now. I can tell you there's a lot of interest of people to invest in climate tech at the moment. And that's great to see, right? And then I think that also creates, on the other hand, these the FOMO maybe, or the need for companies to say, they are a climate tech company, but you're not. You're just, well, we're doing something sustainably better. Yeah, but you are ultimately, I don't know, like I'm making it up, manufacturing company for, like a whatever. I mean, I can't come across any examples right now, but there's a ton of companies out there that are not climate technology companies, right?
Yeah.
When I think of climate technology companies, I'm like technologies that are actively solving for mitigation and adaptation, right? Like, and so I, one of my first questions in when I meet a company would be like, how are you thinking about climate impact? Right, that can be measured in many ways. GHG emissions, global, house greenhouse gas emissions, right? Or like, like energy efficiencies or land efficiency or water. I mean, there's so many ways to, it's not just about CO2. There's so many different ways to measure
Mm.
climate impact. But if your answer pretty much is like, well, we're not sure how to track that, or we haven't even given any thought to that, or like, well, that's a concern. Are you a climate technology company then? Maybe not, right? Like,
Yeah.
and not just like what your solution is deploying, right? Which now we're going back to like the greenwashing aspect is not just how your solution is deploying and ultimately at the solution deployment, what you're doing for climate, but in your own process, in your
Yeah.
own supply chain operations, how, because you could be using a lot of energy and water in your own process when you're to manufacture that solution, right? So or create it. So it has to be like all of it, right? Scope 1, 2, 3. We're talking about that in
Hmm.
terms of emissions. So all of that enters the conversation, And I think I get a lot of questions too. Someone literally asked me this morning. So we saw that you're throwing an event in Houston, right? Like, and you're visiting Houston for Houston Energy Climate Week. Like, isn't that oil and gas country? I was like, yeah, it is. But you know what? Here's the reality too. There are a lot of people that work in oil and gas that have skills and talent that is actually very adaptable or transferable to, say, geothermal energy, right? The same talent and skills that you need to actually pull the oil from the core of the earth is with the same talents you could transfer, and the same skills, right? That you could transfer and instead do geothermal, which is great for nature and, right, to mitigate, right, against climate change. So uh, the I know actually in first-rate degree connections, people who are in oil and gas who want to leave oil and gas really move to, renewable energy or like
Yeah,
other kinds of climate technologies that are actually helping the planet. So you can't really say, I won't talk to those people, period.
right.
You are doing a disservice, right, to
Yeah,
that. So you have to be very, it ultimately is all about like your scorecard, your diligence,
yeah.
simple, sometimes basic Google search of who you're partnering with.
Sure. And
So
like a great investor, once taught me that your diligence is everything, right? And so that does absolutely make sense. And I love the points that you bring up about how people are making certain kinds of assumptions, and about whether or not something is or isn't the way that is mission aligned or not, but also about what is and isn't greenwashing, because I think that's a really good point, especially to bring up to LPs when you have an emerging fund and you're in that process, to kind of make them feel reassured about, like, okay, this is really what I mean. This is what's really important to me. This is not what I mean. And because after deployment, especially in this climate kind of right now too, it's really kind of hesitant and tricky to kind of be like, okay, well, we have deployed, whether it's to a fund manager or to a startup, and we don't know where the money's going afterwards, because like you can't really rewind after certain kinds of decisions are made. So kind of like putting on, these are my transparency levels. This is exactly what I mean. I think that's really important, and it shows so much integrity in the work that you're doing.
thank you. Yeah, and I mean, even I was just talking to someone at a Prime Coalition. So shout out to Prime Coalition for making available this free tool called the Crane tool, right?
Okay.
And what the Crane tool is really simple. You can find, just Google, Crane tool from Prime Coalition. I think it's cranetool.org, the website, but don't comment. You can just Google it. I downloaded it. I went through a demonstration with one of the people in the team, and it is a tool to like help investors and founders as well that are building climate technologies on their own to really measure how their solution is impacting GHG, right? Like CO2 emissions versus a baseline, right? Like so, uh, you might be familiar with Breakthrough Energy Ventures, and what they actually back and fund is companies that have a potential to reduce 1 gigaton. That's a tall order, a company that can claim to reduce 1 gigaton of CO2 emissions over the next decade. That's massive, right? I mean, at Pachamama Ventures, we do measure climate impact in many ways, not just CO2 emissions,
Mm-hmm.
but that is a tool, for example, that can help and aid investors. And
Yeah,
I certainly wanted to
I
go
love
through
that.
that demo last
Yeah,
week because I want to incorporate that in my process, right? I want to invest
yeah.
in companies that have that gigaton scale potential, right? Eventually, maybe not in the next decade. I'm not that's it's really demanding, but I think Breakthrough Energy Ventures certainly has the capital and the brand to both find and fund companies that are doing it over the next decade. But it's certainly something that we're looking into closely.
That's really great. And the more of these kinds of things that are out there, I do think that it's more helpful to funds like yours, to be able to utilize and be very aligned with what it is that you guys are tracking, because after all, what is being monitored is being managed. and, you know, managing
Mhm.
it in a positive way is really great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so just wanted to kind of shift gears as well, you know, this being your first fund, I was wondering what kind of big lessons you have learned that you thought is going to be so helpful to other fund managers that are also going to be doing it for the first time, because you know there are a lot more now than ever, and funds driven out of passion is something that is really great to see.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh my gosh, where to start? Where to start? Mind you, I've only been doing this like really fully focused for about a year, right? And so, you know, as you and I have discussed separately on a one-on-one, we did the first close here in mid-June. I mean, and the work continues, right? I mean, I think it's a massive mountain to set on climbing, especially as a solo GP. And as an outsider in many, many, many ways. Not just the fact that I'm a woman, not just the fact that I'm a woman of color. Not, I mean, all of that is a reality, right? But also an outsider from a background perspective, right? Like, you know, a Fortune 100 finance executive, head scratcher, most of the times, head scratcher, right? Like, yeah, so you are operating in a Fortune 100 environment. How does that translate to working with startups? Like most Fortune 100 executives don't even know where to start, like with like operating at that level, right? Like the fast speed and like, you know, you don't get to say like people have said that to me, like, you know, I feel like in Fortune 100 corporate America, people are like pretty much siloed and like they are doing the specific roles that they are doing.
Right.
And you do hear a lot, and I heard that a lot in my 16 years there, like things like, that's not my job, or that's how we've always done it, right? Which to me actually gets under my skin every single
Oh,
time. It
yeah.
was never me, right? So I was already always a different kind of Fortune 100 person. And perhaps that's why at the beginning, not by design, I was just assigned that. And then eventually it was by design. I realized, you know what? I work better in these like small units, strategic, special projects units that are like going to be that are the high growth engine within corporate America, right? So at PepsiCo, that looked like joining that e-commerce division in 2016, the first ever where we were like really having a finance team assigned fully to operate and run the Amazon relationship for Frito-Lay. But this is 2016, right? Like before the pandemic. So it kind of begged the question when I was hired right after MBA, like who is buying potato chips online, right? Who is in 2016 before the pandemic?
Yeah.
And yet there was a 3x
Yeah.
growth year over year. How? Like, where are these people? Why? You know, but that was, and I had zero job description, nothing. You have to build it all from scratch. You have to find a way to partner with Amazon, Walmart.com, or whatever. Uh, Start a playbooks, start a financial models, figure out the pricing architecture with your pricing partners, like everything, right? And that was kind of what I had been doing in Fortune 100s by the time I started like angel investing and then eventually moved to VC. So seemingly an unfit or like a different back unfit, right? Whoever is so using those words, background to VC, but I think as an operator now and having been there and build these small businesses from scratch into like from millions into billions of dollars of revenue generation actually gave me this perspective and a strength and a way to help these early stage founders really find a way to like even just tell the story about like using financial terms, right? Like, I mean, a lot of these founders that we support are so technical and they're so brilliant, and they just kind of like want to translate that into like what actually sells to investors or you know. And so we are a strategic investor. So but I think learnings, lessons, tough lessons learned along the way is I went from a finance person crunching numbers in Excel, doing all these things to essentially selling. Fundraising is selling. It's another word for selling.
It is.
And so without a sales background, you know, all of a sudden you're switching gears to like talking to people all the time, right? I think that was another aha moment. It's like, okay, well, this takes a different side of my brain almost, you know? But yeah, so that's one of many lessons, but I think worth
I think that,
mentioning.
you know, the fact that you say that, you know, you feel like kind of like a fish out of water because you are from such an untraditional background and then you go into selling, but at the same time, your record will always speak for itself. So you
Mm,
fundraised during one of the hardest ever years in history of VC. and you were able to close where many first-time fund managers were not able to close. And you close in a particular industry that is known to be high capital need right at the start all the time. And so that is already another thing that, a lot of investors that are thinking about the high interest rates are running away from too. So I feel like there's a lot on your side that is showing a lot of great building of these new track records for you as a fund manager as well. So congratulations on all of that success.
Thank you so much, Sina. You're very kind. Appreciate that.
So yeah, I mean, I would love to also just one last thing to also ask you is if you were to give, advice to the climate tech founders, those that want to build huge ideas, and don't really know where to start, but they feel that fire inside them to want to solve the problems that they themselves are facing or they themselves are seeing, where would be a great place to start?
Oh my goodness, what a question. I love that question.
Not everybody's
I
going to
think,
be a scientist. Exactly, right?
yeah, yeah, that's right. I want everyone to work on climate in one way or another.
That is a very
So I love
honest
this question.
answer.
You know, I do think that I think climate is now gonna longer gonna be an optional.
Yeah.
That's my thing.
Yeah.
I think there's not gonna be a climate sector or a climate job. Every job is gonna be a climate job. That's my take, right? And so what I say to founders that want to truly build solutions to climate change is first, don't obsess about the fact that is whether it's VC backable or not VC backable or not, right?
Right.
I know so many entrepreneurs that have gone on and make a huge ton of money, widely successful, and more importantly, if you really care about climate change, huge impact against climate change and helping, right, the transition, not being VC funded. And that's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay, right? VC is this asset class that ends up funding only 1%, right? Like it's just this huge tall order of saying, I think I have the potential to grow this 50x over 100x over the next decade, because otherwise the math doesn't make sense for a
Sure.
fund that has to return to LPs, right?
Sure.
A certain capital multiples over that on all this. So I say just start with a problem you see around you is impacting your in a daily life. You see that you have potential. You have a community that would care. You wherever you see your impact. And I know this is like the non-VC answer to all of this, because as a VC, I was like, yeah, of course, I want to, tell me about your VC back always. Great, right? But I do care so much about moving the needle against climate change, right? So it's where you start, right? Like if you see the problem that you are seeing and others are going through, and you have a creative idea or solution for it, go for it. Start working on it, right? And don't obsess over whether you'll be VC backable or not, or whether Karen at Pachamama Ventures will fund it or not. Stop, right? So, like in other words, don't change and your vision, your passion, just based on a specific investor's even feedback, right? Even my own feedback. I tell founders, even my own feedback, take that with a grain of salt, right? Like you are the only one who knows the problem as close as you do.
Yeah.
So work on it, find the best solution to that problem, and then the rest will come, even the capital, right? So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's really great. I also often tell founders, don't build your company for the investors, build it for your market, because the market will always be right. The market won't lie to you, and the
mhm.
market will really be your North Star that's really driving that business. So I'm really
Yeah,
glad that, you
love
bring
that.
that up as well. So that's
Mhm.
really great. So I think that, this has been really, really great. I got to learn a lot about, your perspective on climate and why this is important to you, and kind of how you have built this new company, this new baby of yours out of passion, which I really, really love. And I think that it does inspire a lot of people to be able to follow this passion and follow this world need into this space. So thank you so much for joining me today, Karen.
Thank you, Sydney. All the best. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks everyone for coming on to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital.